So Paul Bettany, you played Ted Kaczynski in the limited series Manhunt, Unabomber. Take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the role of Ted Kaczynski.
You know what? I was looking for I was looking for a bit of real estate on television, and because I'd never really done long form storytelling before, and it seemed to me that it was a really good, the story of Ted Kaczynski and the hunt for Ted Kaczynski seemed to me a really good use of television, because you have 8 hours. I mean, in a movie, it would necessarily become, because it's an hour and a half, 2 hours, it would necessarily become dogged detective hunts monster, and because you had 8 hours of television, you can get into the sort of domesticity of the detective and the strains on his personal life, his marriage, etc. And also you can get into the domesticity of domestic life of the bomber, the monster, and he therefore stops being just a monster and becomes something more complex and damaged.
Well, he is really a fascinating character to explore over 8 hours, as you said. Tell us a bit about who Ted Kaczynski is, and I mean some of the things that you wanted to bring to the character.
Well, like I guess one can't feel sympathy for Ted, but one can practice a sort of radical empathy and understand and sort of imagine yourself being that child, that rather gifted child who skipped 2 grades ahead at puberty, and then at 16 he's at Harvard, you know, surrounded by, you know, 18 and 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds, which at that age is a vast, you know, difference, you know, and then he is subjected to MK Ultra and mind control experiments. You know, they were trying to break Soviet spies, build a method to break the psyches of Soviet spies, and he was one of the guinea pigs at 16 and 17, and you know, and he was weaponized, I think, by this experience. Mm-hmm. And I think you can feel empathy for the person that is damaged, but no sympathy for his methods, obviously. What I chose to do was very fortunate that we got to shoot a lot of the very idyllic stuff of him just in the woods and in the wilderness, with himself and with nature, and we got to shoot that stuff first, and we kind of got to shoot all of the courtroom stuff last, and then the witness statements, which I asked to be taken out of my script, so I wasn't tempted to read them. So, and they're awful and heartbreaking and shocking, and I think to be faced with that as you know, at the time was really useful to me as an actor.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of stuff out there about Kaczynski, so I wonder, you know, what kind of research you did to, you know, put yourself into the character. Were there books that you read or things like that?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to get a lot of his large sections of his diary that he wrote, and also a autobiography that he was working on and wanting to self-publish. And so that was really useful. And like you say, there are a lot of documentaries. There are a lot of terrible documentaries. There are a lot of really interesting ones. And there are also some great books, some really great books. But the thing that I found most interesting was that when the FBI collated absolutely everything that was in his cabin, they they indexed everything, and including every book that he kept in that 10 by 10 cabin, 10 by 12 cabin. And I found that the most useful, was to find all of these novels that he was reading, and that had sort of, that he had chosen, not just read, but chosen to keep with him. You know, it's a very small cabin. It could be, it was very curated, the library, and all the books that he chose to keep were so cliched. They were, I mean, they're great books, but they were all, it's cliched in terms of, these are exactly the books that you would set dress in the Unabomber's cabin, because they were all the outsider novels. They were all, you know, they were Crime and Punishment, and they were The Secret Agent, and I mean, it was shocking. They were all about men on the outside of the law, and with this crazy amount of, you know, those books have a crazy amount of self-awareness, and it was so strange to me that he clearly identified with these sort of anti-heroes in these great classic outsider novels. And I found that really useful in terms of getting into the headspace, because, you know, their narratives, you know, what I understand nothing about mathematics. A lot of the other books were on mathematics, and that was certainly not an in for me as an actor, but these novels really were.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned all of the idyllic stuff out in nature, and you know, I wonder if you could talk a bit about, I mean, what drove this guy to go out into the woods and try to make a life for himself, and you know, how that kind of got twisted into this radicalization and this extremism. And what do you think, you know, kind of were the steps that led to that?
Well, I think there are a lot of theories about what was going on with Ted. I think that my personal opinion is that his environmentalism that it was not his environmentalism driving his terrorism. It was his own personal alienation driving his terrorism, and justified by his environmentalism. So I'm not wanting to say that he was not an environmentalist. I just don't quite, it doesn't quite track for me. And I think that there was an incredibly damaged person who went to the woods not to be in nature. This is all my own opinion. I just want to preface this. Not to be in nature, but to be somewhere where his sense of loneliness made sense. It is, you are acutely aware of your loneliness in a city surrounded by other human beings. It makes sense for you to experience loneliness if you are in the middle of the woods and there are no human beings around. So that's my theory. He went to the woods to feel less strange about being so alienated and alone, and that kind of isolation is not good for many people.
Right, and I mean, I think, like what you said, I mean, there's something deeper at the root of, it's not just, you know, environmentalism leads to terrorism. There's something much deeper at the root of that.
Absolutely, and also it begs the question: why not go and blow up the national grid? Why did you blow up human beings at some kind of crappy, you know, computer store? That doesn't make sense. You're bright enough. The stuff that he was capable of doing. I mean, you know, the compounds that he made, these explosive compounds that he basically made out of manure and, you know, the roots of mushrooms. I mean, it's fascinating what he did. The glue that he made for these boxes that were made out of the hooves of animals that he killed in the woods. This is a man that could have chosen to go up and you know, blow up some sort of, you know, some power grid, if that's what he was really after. But the softness of the targets is revealing, I think. You know, I don't think, I think it was an anger at human beings that seemed to be able to make a sort of success of community and stuff. Again, my personal opinion.
Right. And I mean, that's all we can really espouse upon, you know, I mean, because no one can really know what's inside of a person's head. Can you talk a bit about working with, you had director Greg Yatens throughout all 8 episodes of this. What did he give you as a director that helped you get inside the mind of this guy and helped you explore some of the deeper, darker aspects of it?
Well, Greg Yatens is he's a really fine director, and really we're fortunate to be both really aligned on how we wanted to go about it, which was to kind of fall in love with the bit of Ted that is heartbreaking and discover the sort of the awfulness of his actions later. And so he allowed me, and it was really what he wanted to do too, to do that. And he was also incredibly collaborative. And now it's that's sort of like it's such a cliche to say. It's what one says about every director, and I would be absolutely. I'm not. Lying is not beneath me, but in this circumstance, he happens to be an incredibly collaborative director, at least with me. And you know, there were times where we were shooting stuff that was in the cabin, where we were trying to express the story of Ted trying to give up his sort of anger and his compulsion to make bombs. And so we figured it out together. You know, we decided, well, that's exactly what it feels like. It's compulsion, and how do we best tell that story? And let's tell that story as if it were, you were telling the story of somebody who was addicted to something. So let us put all of this bomb-making equipment somewhere that we can reference, that he can be physically almost drawn to. And you know, TV's tough. It was the speed at which TV moves was a real surprise to me. I'd just come off, well, I was still shooting simultaneously, or simultaneously if you come from England, but simultaneously, we're in America, The Avengers. And I just got back from Scotland when we started, and we've been in Scotland for 3 weeks shooting 2.5 pages. And then I'm now shooting 10 pages of script a day with Greg. And so time is, you know, you can feel when the lights are burning and the camera's up, and you've sent everybody off to drink tea and coffee, you know. But Greg had, I think it was a really smart choice, as we would come in the morning, he would send everybody off for an hour, sometimes 2 hours, and he and I figured that stuff out together. We shot listed it together, and I've never worked with a director that felt able to invite me into that area of decision making, and it was I think it was really useful for both of us, because you could really be specific about what it is you wanted to tell and how.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Is there a special relevance to telling this story today? I mean, in other words, you know, the events, he was captured about 20 years ago, I think it was. And, you know, so is there a special reason to tell this story now? Is there a special relevance to today, do you think?
No, I think it's really very redolent of our the era that we're going through, and and homegrown terrorism. You know, we're so focused on threats from outside, all of which are mostly imagined, and yet seem to be our schools, etc., seem to be in constant threat from inside, and so I think there is something to talk about, and I think there is something to discuss how we treat people, and you know, if you make people feel that they are alien and that they have no agency, you know, you there can be some pretty frightening and wrought responses to that.
Right. Yeah. Now, you are a BAFTA nominee for Master and Commander. You're also a SAG nominee for A Beautiful Mind, which, I mean, you just reunited with Ron Howard recently for Solo. So what does that kind of recognition mean for you?
I don't know. I don't know. As I get older, I try to think less about it. I have mixed feelings about awards in general. You know, on one level, it feels competitive in a way that I feel sort of uncomfortable with, because I've never thought that of acting as a sport. It always feels like I've worked with actors who you feel that you're in a sporting event, you feel that they're sort of trying to beat you at acting, which is a peculiar feeling. So, but also I also recognize that, you know, even you know, from the very beginning, Greek plays were in competition. So yeah, I have two. I'm of two minds, and I also recognize the amount of focus it can bring to a project that you're working on, and that's very hard. You know, when you're up against behemoth movies like Avengers and Star Wars. You know, I also made a movie this year called Journey's End by a brilliant director, Saul Dibb, and Sam Claflin. You know, I mean, it had names in it. You know, it had Stevie Graham, Toby Jones, and it got wall-to-wall great reviews. Not that I ever read reviews of my work or anybody else's, but I'm told that it had wall-to-wall great reviews, and yet nobody went to see it, and that is that's troubling. So I recognize that those, when films get those accolades, it can be really you know, useful to publicize them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul Bettany, thank you so much, and congratulations on your work. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Really good talking to you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good